and welcome to another week and another Huddle Breakdown. You're with Laura and I am joined by James and Alan. As always, Alan, how are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. Looking forward to the start of something real again.
Start of something real. I thought you were going to break into a High School Musical song there called Start of Something New, but again, that's not a reference many on listen to this podcast will understand, so we'll leave it there. James, how are you?
I'm good. We're recording a day later than normal, and we're recording earlier than normal, so I've got my green and white liquid dispensary here, so I'm caffeinated and ready to rock.
That's fair. We are nothing if not a truly international production. So with that said, let's get cracking. It is obviously International Week, so no Celtic action until at least the weekend, which we will cover in due course. But we are going to focus on some of the questions that you guys have submitted via Twitter, and I'm sure over time there will be other ways to submit those questions. But before we do that, Alan, I'll come to you first. I was actually at the Scotland match last night, and it was interesting to get a little bit of a view or an alternative view of what I felt the match was like compared to the kind of external coverage. I felt Scotland were frustrating in parts. I thought we defended very well. For anybody who doesn't know, we drew 0-0 with Portugal last night. But we just didn't seem to have that outlet to get up the park. I was saying to my brother-in-law when we were sitting at the game that I actually kind of wish it was the way that we had played against Dortmund. A little bit tighter, a little bit more compact, a little bit more disciplined. But what was your impressions based on what you observed from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, I think in keeping with the 4 Nations League games, the home game against Poland, away in Portugal, and then away in Croatia, I think all 4 have been, to me, quite consistent in terms of performance, and I think that what I'm observing really is we talk all the time about performance versus outcome in terms of what do we mean by that? We mean how are the players, how are the manager actually performing on the day, putting the result to one side. If you looked at the underlying metrics, you looked at the actual what they achieved or didn't achieve on the pitch versus the score on the top left-hand corner, which is what obviously a lot of people still kind of fixate on, which is the outcome. And the outcome because it's such a low scoring sport, the outcome can often not reflect the performance, especially over one match, less so over a long period of time, where outcomes will tend to align to performances over the longer term. So long story short, I focus on performances, not outcomes, because that's more predictive of what's going to happen in the future. Now, coming back to Scotland then, I personally would have been not disappointed had Steve Clarke and team, kind of walked away after the Euros with his head held high, qualified for 2 tournaments, not really got the team firing in those tournaments, or really sort of playing in a way that, even in a way that kind of was the classic Scotland going out in glorious failure. It wasn't even that. It was all a bit dull and all a bit damp. And but having stayed on, I'll judge him on the performances, in those matches. And I think what I see, to me, is a team who's essentially playing in the Premier League with a at best a lower Championship team. And that's the reality of it. And I think actually performing in the main admirably well. Should have beaten Poland, should have got a draw in Croatia, probably should have found a way to hold on in Portugal, and actually managed to hold on at home to Portugal. Arguably the performances could have led to those outcomes that I've just said, but they didn't. They led to 3 defeats and a draw. And there's a lot of people who just fixate on haven't won in 15 games, lost 9 competitive matches in a row or whatever. And I get that, right? But, Scotland made a choice to play against Premier League nations in the run-up to the Euros and got hammered in some of those games, and have managed to achieve Group A status in the Nations League, so and therefore are playing super talented teams like Portugal. Croatia are still an incredibly talented side. Poland probably the weakest of them, probably not that far off Scotland's level. So all that being said, I take the view that given the tools at his disposal, I thought he set up absolutely sensibly. I really liked the way that they didn't just hoof the ball up the pitch. They tried to play their way out from the back. It wasn't always successful because, guess what? There's some technical limitations with the players that you're actually dealing with here. You're expecting a 18-year-old kid on the wing to be a wonder kid when it's painfully obvious to anyone that he's got a huge amount of development still to do. His decision making needs to improve hugely. He doesn't. He passes the ball and then doesn't move. I'm not going to put the kid down. He looks incredibly exciting, and probably if he's the most exciting kid that Scotland have, great. I'm glad he's playing, but it does show you that you cannot just throw kids in at that level because there's so much growth that is needed. And Doak's a good example of that. Anyway, I don't want to pin it all on him. I thought he's shown bright moments in both games. But Scotland have got, I would argue, not even championship level, League One level goalkeepers. They've got League One level centre backs, and Shea Adams is doing well in Serie A. He's a workhorse. He's a runner. He's a grafter. He doesn't have the innate quality as a striker that you need to open up, Group A level defences, and below Adams, it's League One level strikers, right? That's the spine of your team. That is the spine of your team. So what are you going to do with that? You've got a good collection of midfielders. You've got a good collection of fullbacks when they're fit, and you've got some a little bit of quality out wide. But through the spine of the team, centre forward, centre back, goalkeeper, it's terrible. It's so short of quality, and that matters. It absolutely matters at that level. So, that's what he's got to deal with. I thought they worked round it well against an incredibly talented side that's going to get ruined by Martinez because he's awful. Same as he ruined Belgium. But they got. I'm glad they got an outcome. And as I say, I asked you before we started. It felt to me as if the crowd stayed with the team, which I was really pleased about. And we're actually pretty content with a draw, recognised the gulf in quality, recognised the gulf in capability, stayed with the team, saw that what they were trying to do, saw that in the main they were executing it well. There wasn't a huge, I don't know what the XG was from the game, I didn't check, but I don't think it was like a massive, it wasn't like a 3.5 or anything like that.
I have it right in front of me, Alan.
Go on then.
It was, this is Y-Scout, obviously, but it was, they have it Portugal 1.17, Scotland 0.38.
Yeah, I mean, I think to hold a team of that quality
within our magic one, Alan, within our magic one differential.
Exactly, it's within one, and guess what? They got away. They got away with a draw, but got away with in terms of Gordon made a couple of good saves, but it wasn't like the ball was flying across the front of the 6-yard box and he was all over the place. It was
they only had him with 13 or 14 shots, which again for a team like Portugal that's them sleeping through a game or.
Yeah, we forced them wide, and they had to find a way through, and they were probably over pedantic in what they were trying to do. So yeah, listen. So that that's my thoughts on that. I would have been happy for Steve Clarke to walk away after the summer. He didn't. He's still here, and I think he's doing a pretty good job with the hand he's been dealt in a level that's probably above the capabilities of most of the players he's got.
Yeah, I mean when you're sitting there watching, with all due respect, the players we have, and then Portugal at 60 minutes say, we're going to bring on João Felix, Bernardo Silva, Rafa Leao, and, oh God, I can't even remember who else. But that, I mean, yeah, you were hunkering down for that last half an hour and just hoping against hope that you would get away with the point, which we did. It brings me on to another point, though, James, and I wanted to get your opinion on this before we go to the questions and answers, because you'll have some knowledge or experience of this over in MLS with Lionel Messi. I saw Ronaldo last night. I'm pretty sure I've observed him playing for Man United years and years ago at Celtic Park, so he wasn't quite the superstar that he is now. the atmosphere around him being in a football match is the most bizarre thing I have ever come across in my life. We had the obligatory pitch invader trying to get the selfie. When he was warming up, Scottish fans were cheering as he came over to our side of the stadium. I had kids sitting next to me with broad Glaswegian accents but a Ronaldo shirt on. I mean, I guess the reason I wanted your opinion of it was, I mean, has it affected the competitiveness in games featuring Messi and MLS? Because with it being a more regular feature there, I can't understand what the atmosphere must be like at games like that, because I find it utterly bizarre.
Yeah, it's that's that when you get into that upper echelon of fame that transcends domain. You know, the Taylor Swift, the Michael Jackson, the Messi, Michael Jordan. If you go back and look at the Dream Team, the U.S., which was basically one of the greatest basketball teams ever assembled in 1992 at the Olympics, the star power that was there. It transcends. It's a cultural phenomena independent of sport, and we're experiencing that in the United States with Messi. And I haven't been to a game that he's at for one main reason: is I am a cheap SOB, and I will not be extorted to spend $500 to buy a ticket to go see him play and not know if he's actually going to play. Which to his credit, he's actually, for the most, he's been actually injured at times where he hasn't been able to play, but for the most part, he's been very vigilant in making sure that he plays. And the MLS season's very long, a lot of travel. Weather during the summer can be infamously, difficult. So he does a lot of walking around when you watch him. But yeah, it's a cultural phenomenon as he's been going to stadium, and what the league's been doing. I'll give you an example. So Kansas City's one of the kind of classic early MLS franchises, but it's a kind of small city and they don't have a big stadium. Well, they moved the stadium to where the Kansas City the game when Messi was in town to play where the Kansas City Chiefs play, which is like 80,000, and they sold it out. And yeah, it was like a cross between a there's big what do they call them, super churches? You get these like Billy Grahams to go into. It's like that kind of energy that I've sensed and talked to people that have gone to games. Like it's almost like it's the only way I can describe it as a cultural phenomena. People show up because it's a thing to go see, and that energy kind of permeates even in what ultimately is like a meaningless regular season MLS game. But yeah, it's fascinating to see. These things don't come around that often, these type of people. I mean, they really are, I'm personally not a fan of Ronaldo. He has some history in the United States. He won't be coming back most likely, allegedly.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, the people of that level, they're like a rock star, ultra famous. I did have one quick comment on Scotland, if I could make that.
Yes.
So first of all, I think that Scotland playing against that tier of opposition actually suits Clark. I think his problem is playing the Hungaries of the world because his impulse is to be, very, very defensive. So, he's good at that. We saw that Kilmarnock. I mean, he's good at organizing. We saw that in the early tenure at Scotland when they were kind of grinding out the 1-0s and, beating some teams that were better probably than Scotland. So I think that suits them. But yeah, I mean, the talent level is just shocking in the side with the injuries that are there. And to me, I put something on Twitter. There was I think it was the Herald published this big expose, and there's on youth development, and there's been a lot of kind of conversation within kind of Scottish football this international break on kind of the setup and culture of Scottish football. And on the same day that got released, Craig Gordon started in goal. I would argue he's 3 years past his sell-on date, at least, from when he was actually a good keeper overall, meaning that he still was maybe passable shot stopping 3 years ago. That's gone now. Like, it's not that he can't make saves, but over any stretch of time, I would not count on him making a lot of great saves. He's 41. He's soon to be 42.
I don't have the stats to back this up, but I personally think he was maybe a year beyond his sell-by date by the time he left Celtic. And how long ago was that,
At Celtic's level, yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to, I put out a tweet, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago now, basically framing that Scotland has a goalkeeper problem, and not just the national team, but kind of like how keepers are being valued and, how their performances are measured. It's not clean sheets, by the way. It shouldn't be. His issue is, I listened to the BBC Scotland show after the game talking about Craig Gordon, and it's like, is this guy Gigi Buffon? Like, oh, his decision making is great and all this stuff. I'm like, what? Like, all of these, we talk about this all the time. The stats are not perfect. They are a guide, and you need to be, good at analyzing what they might be reflecting, what signal from the noise. But you could not have a larger disparity directionally between reality relative to a statistical profile of Craig Gordon and what their narrative is. Like, they are so diametrically opposed. He is not a good decision maker. I mean, we've been joking about that for years as Celtic supporters, with his kung fu kicks and, coming out at wrong times and doing that kind of thing. But just on a micro basis, like when to come for crosses, like all of that, his parrying, all of these things, the evidence is not great. So that's an example. Now, I don't know what the answer is, because the cupboard's kind of bare. But even at Hearts, like, I don't know how Gordon's back over Clark. Like, I don't understand. Like, it's how some of these decisions are being made. But so I just thought I'd throw that in there. Let's move on to the viewers.
I was going to say, once the Tony Bloom algorithm cranks in, I'm sure he won't be number one for long.
I'd be shocked if he is.
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough, and we could dig into the problems of the Scotland national team and be no further forward after 3 hours. So let's get straight into the listeners' questions. The first one, I know you talked about him a few weeks ago, James. So I'll maybe go to Alan on this one first. Apologies for anybody listening or watching. I don't have the people's names who submitted the questions, but thank you all for your questions submitted anyway. Alan, do we think Palma has any realistic chance of being a starter for Celtic again? Now, my first response to that would be, why would you want that? But I think the more wide interpretation of the question would be, what does he need to do to improve to get anywhere near starting for Celtic again? The last time he did start was the Falkirk match, and he didn't exactly cover himself in glory that day.
No, I mean, I think he's got two fundamental problems. Is that, I think Rodgers was a bit taken aback when he saw him in training and the lack of pace that he had. And the second is, as I've alluded to many times in the past, I think with Palma, it's more about attitude. I'm not saying he's our Cantwell, but I'm not sure his attitude chimes with the way that. I mean, Rodgers keeps a pretty tight ship as regards everyone being on the same side as regards, their commitment, the way that they train, etc., etc. And I do think he may well be a bit of a problem. But in terms of where we are in the season, the number of games we've got between now and January, we're not in a situation like we were with Angeball, where the super subs come off the bench and finish the game off, and in fact embellish the game with lots of goals in the last 15 minutes. Especially in the wide forward areas, it's a bit bare, right? Once Kuhn and Maeda have run their race, you're kind of hoping that Jamesy Forrest will tweak into action, bless him. And listen, I don't want to disparage Forrest, but he's 33 now. He's a player that's relied on pace. I still think he'll do a good job and rack up some decent numbers in the SPFL, but he's not going to make a difference at the Champions League level. He just can't. It's just a physical impossibility for him to do that now. And then, you've got Yang and you've got Palma. Well, to me, with Yang, there's just an ability gap there that's never going to be closed. I'm afraid he's just not anywhere near the quality of a Celtic player, the level that Celtic play at. So I think Forrest and Palmer are going to have to contribute between now and the end of the end of December, when the transfer window opens again, just because they are the only options that we have to play the squad game, and you need to have it freshened up in those wide attacking areas. You have to. You can't rely on the same players playing 90 minutes, especially when, we saw before the break, Maeda kind of collapsed physically. I think against Ross County, was it? He had 4 pressures the whole game. The guy had put in a hell of a shift in Dortmund. He had been all season, but even he has got his limits. He's done a lot of travelling, but I don't think he's played much for Japan, maybe 20 minutes tops. So hopefully he's had a bit of time to recharge his immense battery over the last couple of weeks. And Kuhn's in a sort of rarefied atmosphere of delivery at the moment. And which, I think this is probably a follow-up question that we've got, but I doubt it's sustainable. And I'm just saying that because his numbers are so incredible at the moment. It's likely it's a bit of a hot streak. And, just through natural fact that players can't maintain those hot streaks unless they're exceptional over a long period, he's bound to settle down a little bit. And in which case, then you're looking at, well, if he's having a quiet day, who's going to come in and do it? So I think we're going to have to work around this, and it's not ideal. And it actually is one of the things I worry about the most, to be honest with you, over the next couple of months until the end of December. I do worry that we don't have the depth in the attacking areas, especially wide, that could actually come to hurt us materially in that time. And I come back to the issue of trust. A manager ends up playing the players that he trusts. I don't believe that Palmer has that trust, that Rodgers feels he can put him in and he'll give his all, pour his heart out, make good decisions when it really matters. And once you don't have that, you never get it back. Very rare with a manager, any manager. So, but that said all that, I think we're going to have to rely on him still over the next couple of months.
Yeah, James, I think it reflects on some of what Alan said about attitude, that the first thing I thought when I saw a picture last night showing that Palma had attended the Scotland game, my first thought was, instead of what I would think for any other player, which was he's going to observe football and he's going to see what he can learn, my first cynical thought was he's there to see Ronaldo, like any, impressionable teenager or anything like that. And maybe that's me being a little bit too cynical, but I think it speaks to the potential attitude that he has displayed or not displayed, whatever way you want to look at it. But Alan has said we are going to have to rely on him to some extent. You said a phrase, and I'll paraphrase you, a couple of weeks ago, talking about him, that he is the player that you thought he was when we signed him. He hasn't, he's not. I can't imagine any Celtic scout or any statistician who reviewed him saw anything that he's now not displaying at Celtic. So my query then is, how does he end up in a Celtic shirt? Because if he displayed what he's displaying now at his previous club, how does that happen?
Yeah, so I think Palma is an example of how stats can be, attuned to the lies, damn lies, and statistics. So I think he's a good case study in making the distinction between stats and analytics. And so I earmarked him and have called him a compiler ever since I benchmarked him back when we were rumored to sign him and then sign him. And what that means is that again, the other analogy I've used, time for a cross-sport analogy, is a ball hog in basketball, right? So a ball hog in basketball is someone that you pass to and you just expect you're never going to get it back. The ball, they're going to chuck it up. Doesn't matter what the context is. It's not going to be a good shot necessarily, but they're going to take a shot. They're a gunner. And to me, that's kind of a comparable profile description of Palma. Now, having said that, so I was not a fan of the signing. I agree with everything that Alan said. There could be, and I'm usually pretty hesitant to be critical of players because I think they have a tough job and they're well compensated and all that. But playing at Celtic in Scotland generally is a pretty rough thing to do for players. So I tend to try to not pile on players. But so there could be an attitude issue. I agree there could be a cultural fit issue with Rodgers. But I think he has utility. And the reason why I think he has utility is because, as I've talked about recently, the last couple of weeks, I'm concerned about our creativity out of midfield. I'm concerned about our ball progression out of midfield. And Maeda's not helping either of those. And because we need to rotate, we cannot flog these guys to death. I mean, we're getting into the pressure cooker of seasonality heading into the holiday period. And I don't think there's a winter break again this season. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, we're going to pile on the fixtures here, particularly with the extra Champions League into July or January now, at least. I mean, this is going to be a situation with the track record of Rodgers and Celtic with soft tissue injuries. Like, it would be stupid to flog our wide players, given everything that Alan said. And I think Palma's profile is one that can help us against bottom 6 teams that are going to bunker at home. It's at Celtic Park, kind of like what I talked about with McGowan, which is guys that are going to try a lot of crap against a bunkered opponent. And you know what? At times it's going to look horrible. And that's probably also culturally why Rodgers doesn't fancy him that much, is that he's a high volume risk taker that doesn't really care about possession. And, for, again, anyone who's watched Central American or South American football, like Copa America games, like that's the style of play. It's like a ping pong match or a tennis match with how fast possession could be turned over and how chaotic it could be. So I think we need some of that, or we could use some of that on a relative basis. And within that context, he's actually pretty good. Like, he's a guy that can create out of nothing. He can score a goal from 20 yards at an angle, top shelf. Like, technically, he's actually pretty talented on the ball. It's the decision-making and the judgment, the motor at times, and the lack of speed and quickness.
It's the consistency and effort as well.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, again, I that wild card, I think, at times could be useful. And, on a cold night in Kilmarnock in the rain, is Maeda going to do much against a bunkered Derek McInnes team? When the ball's bouncing around on a wet pitch, and between him and Maeda and Palma in those kind of conditions, like I don't think it's a clear who's the better pick against that kind of opposition contextually, and so because you can make that argument, and you have to do some rotation, I think he needs to play a role. And that, because he is competent when he's on his game, and we can't really say that about Yang on the ball. I think he and Forrest are the guys that can help contextually against those kind of bunkered opposition. To turn those, 0-0 winter weeknight games into a 1-0. Like, I think he could be a difference maker, even if it's a couple games in the season. That's anywhere from 2 to 4 points. He could make a difference if he's deployed smartly and does what he does. And again, so I'm not fantasizing over some greatness that's going to happen, but again, the hurdle rate of a tired Maeda against a bunkered opposition at Celtic Park, probably give me Palma is my view.
Well, I'm not going to join you in speaking disparagingly about Daizen Maeda in any way, because that has got me into some bother before. But another thing I think we need to start is for anybody who's going to be subscribing to the Substack in the coming weeks and months, because we're going to have content over there. I personally would like to see a glossary of American sports terms helmed by our very own James, just so that he can define exactly what he's talking about.
Let it forever remain a mystery.
Yes,
It's much better when people have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's far more pleasurable.
Yeah, I think midfield battle must mean something different in America. I don't know.
Guns are involved.
We'll go on to the next question. Alan, I'll come to you on this one first. I have my own opinions on this one, but I'm interested to hear your guys. What expectations do you have of the board, if the board let him do his job, of Paul Tisdale's appointment, and what impact do you think he could have on the team or squad? Alan, I'll go to you.
Yeah, so we kind of covered this a little bit in the last show. So first of all, I think again in classic Celtic style, we're getting very poor, complete lack of, in fact, not even poor, just none communication about what Paul Tisdale's role actually is. So I've heard whispers that he is and has been working with Celtic for some time as a consultant, and that may well remain the case. Whether that leads to a full-time role, and whether that's, as 67 Hail Hail reported, and Stephen McGowan suggested that essentially replacing Mark Lowell's head of recruitment role, I don't know. So it's not clear to me exactly what he's doing and what role he is currently employed in, and what the vision is for him going forward. So that makes it very difficult to answer the question, to basically. But what I would say is, having done some research on him, listened to him, watched him, I guess I'm kind of optimistic in terms of, I'm pleased that Celtic have brought in somebody who's going to shake the tree at least, and not have any qualms about it. So he's not gonna just sort of kowtow to the conservative, sort of bland nature of the Celtic board. I think he's going to be somebody who really looks at it and comes up with kind of possibly some left field and alternative solutions to how Celtic can better run their football operations. That would be my hope anyway. Now, as always with these things, and somebody who's worked with consultants throughout my career, it really comes down to what then happens when you get the final report. That's really the key. We've got all this expertise in house. Hire us to come. We'll sort it out. Here are all the recommendations, and you need us to do that, etc., etc. So. But that really is, being facetious, putting that to one side. That really is the acid test. Is what are the recommendations, and are they actually acted upon? And do we see some meaningful development and improvement in the football operations? And that we don't know. So lots of unknowns at this stage. I think I would definitely have him down as a disruptor. I think if ever a club needed a disruptor, it's Celtic. So that's all good. But as usual with Celtic, we're very light on details to what's actually happening and what will happen off the back of it.
Yeah, James, it's difficult to put an opinion across when we don't know exactly what he's going to be doing and what the role is. But Alan said there, at least it's somebody who might shake the tree a little bit. Knowing Celtic as we all do, the problem there is somebody comes in and shakes the tree and is immediately removed from the forest. In my experience and estimation,
Laura,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it is absolutely relevant. So, at the top of my X feed is the Celtic Way breaking news. Paul Tisdale has been appointed as Celtic's head of football operations. The 51-year-old assisted the club in the summer transfer window. He now joins Celtic on a permanent basis. So I will let James and you respond to that breaking news. Head of football operations.
Breaking news. Wow. Yeah. So we are recording this. What time is it? This is about 2:45 p.m. UK time on Wednesday afternoon of this week, the 16th of October, and that is breaking news. Oh man, I feel like a news reporter here. Let's go to James for his thoughts on the breaking news coming out of Celtic Park. Paul Tisdale is officially appointed. James, what are your thoughts?
Nicely deflected. Well done.
What I was prepared to say even before that breaking news is, all this best dressed guy in football and stuff. Like, I don't care about that crap, right? What I cared about when I heard or watched the one interview he did, and he was talking about his consulting business and what he was up to. To me, it was like spreadsheet shagging pornography. Like, I got excited because he said he created his own algorithm. Okay. That's the kind of stuff a guy says that gets you excited. And the reason why I'm excited about that is because it displays, and when he was doing that back in his period with Exeter and, then NK Don. So someone who's willing to think outside the box, not even within the culture of Celtic, but he's a problem solver. He's willing to think on a heterodox basis. And he's not anti-intellectual, right? So that's been part of my criticism is, that this is not a football arms race that has been introduced in the last 10 years in the sport. It is an IQ, intellectual horsepower arms race. And that's the same path that followed in other sports. And I think that that's been a underappreciated aspect, and particularly at Celtic. And so I my preference, and I've said this before, my preference would have been that he has some experience inside a world-class kind of setup. But I'm less concerned about that than I am someone who's shown an ability to be a builder and to do things outside the box. That comes back to the concerns that Alan, I think, rightly expressed last week, which is what's the tolerance going to be for that? And, joking as Alan did about consultants, the vast majority of the time the consultants are hired, this is why McKinsey is such a huge institution globally, is not to actually get advice, it's to provide political cover for what you wanted to do anyway. Right? So that you have someone else to blame if it goes horribly wrong. That's basically what McKinsey gets paid for. And at least that's my view. So if this guy's being brought in to actually help build, that's what I've been calling out for a long time, is an architect type that's going to stick around for a while. And he's shown with his time at Exeter and, what I've heard him talk about his experience is that's what this guy wants to do. Like, he's not someone who's job hopping just unnecessarily. Like, he wants a challenge and he wants to really get into it and build something. And I think, he can hire the physics PhD. He can hire some of that intellectual firepower. And I think there's a reasonable basis to think that he's of the ilk that he understands that that's what's required. So that'll be about, Celtic backing him. And the good part is I like that job title. Like, that's, director of football, whatever. I mean, they probably had to call him director of operations so that Dermot Desmond didn't get his back up. So he can still say we don't follow that model, director of football or technical director. So they gave him another title. That's fine. But to me, it's kind of in that same vein, which is the brains of a modern sporting enterprise and upscaling that.
Sorry, James. Sorry to interrupt. I've just seen it's actually on the official site. So I'll just read you what it says on the Celtic Football Club site. Delighted to announce appointment of Paul Tisdale, Celtic Head of Football Operations. In this new strategic role, reporting to the board. Okay? So he's reporting to the board. Paul will oversee the development and management of effective operations to support high-level football performance, including the identification and development of talent, in line with the club's objective to develop Champions League players through our academy and recruitment processes.
Yeah,
so he's reporting to the board. So that's key.
That's a director of football. So, they gave him a different title, which again, I don't care. Like, if Desmond needs to be placated, then that's fine. But effectively, they've hired a director of football, and that's what we've been crying out for. So, and to me, his profile, he's not, a ex-Celtic player. he's not Gordon Strachan, which again, Strachan, for all, you can love him as a former player, manager, all that stuff. That would have been a horrible appointment for director of football in my judgment. Like, he's shown nothing in his CV that would suggest that he's someone who's going to lead innovation and really push us to close the chasm of a gap that we have to get to where we need to be. And that's not only where we need to be now, because it's going to take us a while to get there. You got to think about where we're supposed to be in a year or two. That's the Wayne Gretzky. You got to skate to where the puck's going. So that gap is continuing to accelerate. And somebody who's a risk taker and smart and willing to, innovate, which I think he's shown, at least to a degree, like directionally, this is, I think, a very positive appointment if he's empowered and given the resources to build.
So sorry, I would add that it potentially the club have been reasonably smart here, or everyone's been reasonably smart here, in that there's plenty of evidence to suggest, and I think it's even reported, that he was working with Celtic during the summer transfer window, which means everybody's had at least 3 to 4 or 5 months of working together, playing together, and presumably we've made this appointment on the basis that he's happy with what he's seen and feels he can do his job. The board are happy with what they've seen and feel they can work with the guy. Brendan Rodgers has worked with the guy and feels he can work with him going forward. So, that would have been what the last 3 or 4 months have been about. So in terms of reducing the risks that I identified of, this is just going to blow up because it's just going to be a cultural step too far for everybody, and it's just going to be a nightmare. That at least has been allayed to some respects, is that everyone's had a buy before you try by the looks of it.
Yeah, I mean, just reflecting on what was said there, it was actually mentioned in the viewer/listener's question, if the board allow him to do his job. We heard from the statement that he's reporting to the board. That, for me, is going to remain the big stumbling block, is how flexible are the board going to be to accepting his recommendations. I think from what we've all seen, what we've all read, there's no doubt that this guy is a good appointment for the role he has been appointed to. Whether he will be allowed to carry that out to the fullest of his abilities remains to be seen, because I think Celtic's board have a tendency to want to do the right thing but then shoot themselves in the foot. So that remains to be seen. But yeah, a big piece of news, I think, and something that hopefully can see us progress in the right way in terms of getting the targets we want in the Champions League and generally competing more in Europe. However, I will say one thing, James. I don't mind the basketball analogies. I don't mind the American football analogies. I draw the line at hockey. I don't get that at all.
That's actually more European of all the sports. Come on.
It's not their sport; it's our sport.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna have the entire Scandinavian block of huddle breakdowns, fans and viewers in an uproar over this, and the Russians. We have a huge audience in Russia.
Oh, you know me, James. I can take on the Vikings, no bother. Having said that, we will move swiftly on to the next question. An interesting one here. I'm trying to pick out some that we can maybe leave till next week to the Atalanta game is a little bit closer, so I will do that. I know you guys maybe won't have had a chance to prepare for this, but I'm going to dive in anyway because I just like talking about it. Somebody has asked, do the numbers tell us where Aberdeen are likely to finish? I have a feeling that I know what your answer is going to be, but I wanted to hear it anyway. Alan, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so early days. So I think I flagged up a few weeks ago that Aberdeen were scoring goals at a ludicrous conversion rate of like over 50%, which just simply wasn't sustainable. So, and they've won nearly all the games in the league by 1 goal, right? So, and whilst there is no doubt that there's a positive momentum in terms of the whole club, in terms of the players' confidence, belief in the manager, the development of what looks to be a coherent system of quite sort of direct counter-attacking play, allied to quite smart pressing actually, and deployment of players in the right positions, working well, players who of modest ability that seem to be, all performing well at the same time, which hints at good sound management and people being asked to do roles they're comfortable with. So the likes of Nicky Devlin, the Maddie they've got at centre back, the lad McGrath, the guy Papa Gay, Shinnie even at 33, reinvented as a sort of a kind of pseudo pressing number 10. It's just all these things are great. I think really entertaining, right? So there's a coherence there, there's a togetherness there, supporters, club, manager, which is great to see. Underlying metrics suggest they're kind of overperforming to a reasonably large degree, and that over the long term, you're kind of looking at third place, and probably not even third place by a point or two, probably maybe up to 10 points, unfortunately, in the third place over the season. So that's kind of what the data says. But I do strongly believe that when you have that momentum that I talked about, that togetherness, that belief, that confidence, that is worth something. It is worth something. Isn't necessarily measurable in the data, but there's a value add there in having that. The other thing I'd add, just to finalise, is they bought the best shot stopper in the league. James is more knowledgeable on goalkeepers than I am, but Mitov, the guy can't kick the ball for toffee, but he's a really good shot stopper, and he's definitely that's why he could never play for Celtic, because just distribution is chronic. But he's the, in terms of value add, saves over goals not conceded over average, if you like, in terms of expected goals faced as this. He's kind of saved this. So he's kind of saved this number of goals, essentially. He's probably the best goalkeeper in the league in that regard, and he's certainly been doing that for them this season. And if that continues, then you've got a fighting chance.
James, I think the Aberdeen have been a bit of a surprise package. They had a relatively new manager coming into this season. They lost Bojan Miłowski, not only their best player by a mile, but one of the best players in the league. I think most people were expecting it to be a bit of a turnaround season for them. The fact that it hasn't been, I think, has been quite refreshing for the league, and also just from a Celtic supporters' point of view, it's really nice that the only other team Rangers dislike as much as us is Aberdeen, and that they're the ones that are winding them up.
Yeah, so the past two seasons, so the last season and then so far this season, are a great, use this phrase again, case study in what I call my expected trophies nerdy model, which is kind of conceptualizing the flow of performance from relative money spent, right? So wage budgets, down through recruitment quality, and then you have managerial decisions, selection, tactics, things like injuries. And then you have this block, which I've written more and more about in the last 2 years, which is controllable and uncontrollable luck, right? So there's things that you can control and there's things you can't control. So what you can't control is that opposition keepers stand on their head against you versus other teams in the league. So that's something that's uncontrollable. Controllable is, coach your players not to be such idiots in decision-making, right? Conceptually. So last season, if you look at the relative underlying performance, if you go from kind of money fuels XG differential, Hearts and Aberdeen are effectively right where they were last season. And yet their outcomes have completely inverted. Even more extreme this season than last season. Hearts actually has a better non-penalty XG differential so far this season than Aberdeen does. And they're last in the table. XG's crap. Doesn't mean anything. And so the problem that people have is, I shouldn't say, problem, but one of the misconceptions is that some of these mean reverting aspects, Alan's talked about Aberdeen overperforming, and they have, that's objectively true relative to the models. Whether or not they're going to mean revert and to the degree with which they'll do that, I think is highly uncertain. And I wrote an article about this about 2 years ago now, doing an analysis and looking at some nonlinearity in the data that's, you can look up Zipf's law. And I wrote about how the variance of outcome relative to expected points might follow Zipf's law. That's my theory anyway. It had to be tested. But so the idea is that you're going to, these controllable and uncontrollable variables have randomness, but they actually kind of align in a way that is consistent season over season. You just don't know which teams are going to populate the variance, right? So last season, the variance was crazy in favor of Hearts and Aberdeen was in the toilet, and now it's flipped. I wouldn't have predicted that. Some of it's controllable, some of it's uncontrollable, but it's happening. And so the idea, so I think Aberdeen are likely, there's enough good stuff there. And I agree with Alan, like that some of the stuff is robust enough, looks like, and this is the opposite of Hearts last year. Hearts I thought was being awfully managed and that their variance was such that they could kind of collapse if things swing on a results basis. And that's what's happened. This, I think, is much more robust because I think they're being set up coherently, well managed. Like the markers for that is good, but the finishing is the part that's completely unsustainable. Like I went through every shot that they've scored on this season, and it's like, just inside the, just inside the top shelf, or just inside that corner. I mean, like. There's post-shot XG, not only on a total basis has been crazy, but like the distribution's been crazy. So that's highly unlikely. But maybe opposing keepers will turn into dogs, or, there'll be other aspects of variance that will help them. And it's just funny how these things tend to line up where you get, and I wrote a column this week for the Substack looking at Leicester's season when they won the league in the EPL, and the impact of positive variance over a full season, and how it's just amazing that teams that win leagues tend to have some positive variance, unless you're like a monstrosity in an uncompetitive league. So, I wouldn't be surprised if it endures for the full season in various ways for them to continue to overperform XG. And I think they are being well coached. I actually think they're a better matchup versus Rangers and Celtic now because of the way that their manager coaches and the way he plays. I'm not saying that they're going to, get a result on the weekend or even beat us this season. I don't know, but I think that they're more coherently set up to compete against higher quality teams like Celtic and Rangers under Thielen. So I'm excited to see how the season plays out for them, just kind of, as I said, because from a case study perspective, and Hearts will get better now too. Like Hearts are not staying in the bottom. They're going to go on a tirade here at some point where they'll run off 10 straight or something. Like there's too much quality in that side, and they're, the person that they've hired looks like they're at least competent, and they did use Bloom's algorithm to do it. So I'm going to defer to Tony Bloom there and his algorithm and say, the guy's probably at least competent. So I think it'll still be kind of nip and tuck in that for third and fourth. I think Aberdeen will likely go through a dry patch at some point, and that it'll tighten up the table. But yeah, I think they'll be there. I mean, I think they're going to continue to be a pain in the butt for Celtic and Rangers for the duration.
Yeah, Hearts with a competent manager will be a nice but scary change for the fans over in Edinburgh. We've ran out of time, even though we got loads of questions. That breaking news did kind of sidetrack us a little bit, so we will keep those for another day. Before we go, Alan, what's coming up on Thursday for everybody who listens to that second show of the week for the Huddle Breakdown, and what can we expect in terms of content going forward?
Yep. So Thursday show, which I think we're still recording on Thursday, so it probably comes out Friday morning early. We're delighted to have an analyst, Gavin McPhee, who writes tactically and sort of analytically about the Dons. He has his own Substack, which I recommend that you seek out. It's what's it called actually? I will find out for Thursday. Sorry, Gavin. I will do better in that respect. But he writes very well about Aberdeen, and as I say, I think they're a very interesting story, and certainly probably the most interesting story of this season so far in terms of the SPFL. So Gavin will be on as our special guest on that. The Substack is really taking off now. Again, Substack sounds a very nerdy, sort of technical word. It's really just it's a website. It's a platform that allows us to bring together all the podcasts that we do, the Huddle Breakdown podcasts, James's writing, his benchmark reports, his spreadsheet shagging activities, allows us to, put all the Celtic by Numbers archive is now on there. I wrote my farewell to WordPress on my Celtic by Numbers site this week, so please have a look at that and get yourself signed up to the subsite. You just need an email address, and at the moment, everything that gets written, or every podcast, every new piece of writing on there, you'll get an email to tell you about it, and then around about the beginning of November, we'll bring in the subscription service, because obviously this level of professionalism, which I don't include me in that, by the way, the level of professionalism that I hope you're seeing on the written content, the podcast production, and so forth, that obviously doesn't come for free. So we need to kind of cover all that off. And frankly, I think the content that's being produced is of a really good quality and is worth it. So I hope you share that belief. So more on that. We'll do a piece which explains a bit more about what's going on over on the Huddle Breakdown site, and all the different content portfolios that are on there, if you like. But as I say, Thursday, I think we're firmly in the cadence now of Tuesday, Thursday recordings coming out Wednesday and Friday. We'll continue with that. There might be some nip and tucking and ducking and diving, depending on dates of Champions League games and all that sort of thing, and availability. I mean, somebody like Laura is very difficult to get hold of because she's very much in demand. So you have to take her when we can get her, etc. So loads and loads of stuff now. It's all really super exciting, and thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah, Alan, I keep meaning to give you my agent's number to get in touch with me a bit easier, but and just for clarification as well, James's spreadsheet.
I blocked her weeks ago.
James's spreadsheet shagging activities are strictly non-video, and just to clarify, so please don't see that as a reason not to subscribe. It really is as exciting as you would imagine. Thank you, James, and thank you, Alan, for joining me. It's going to be another fantastic week. I can feel it in the Celtic world, and we will see you again next week, or you can join us on Thursday. See you then.